Before Hitler destroyed Jewish lives, he destroyed Jewish humanity. He turned neighbors into parasites, citizens into enemies, families into a threat. And once Germany believed that lie, violence no longer looked like crime. It looked like cleansing. Welcome to the channel where history breathes, bleeds, and refuses to stay buried. Subscribe and tell us which dark chapter of history we should uncover next. Because before the trains carried Jewish families away, Germany had already pushed them out of its heart. Germany did not collapse in a single night. It rotted slowly, silently, like a wounded animal bleeding beneath the snow while the world walked past, pretending not to hear it breathe. The First World War ended in 1918. But for millions of Germans, the war never truly ended inside their minds. The records lie when they call it peace. There was no peace in the streets of Berlin. No peace in the factory towns drowning in unemployment. No peace in the trembling hands of veterans waking from nightmares with the smell of mud, blood, and gunpowder still trapped inside their lungs. Germany had not simply lost a war, it had lost its identity. A silence that speaks volumes hangs over the photographs of the time. Men standing in endless bread lines beneath skies the color of ash. Mothers clutching children while carrying baskets filled with banknotes so worthless they could barely buy a loaf of bread. Some families burned stacks of paper money for warmth because it was cheaper than coal. And humiliation has a smell. Cold sweat, cigarette smoke, empty kitchens. The unbearable odor of hopelessness. The Treaty of Versailles pressed down on Germany like a boot on the throat. Reparations, territorial losses, national shame carved into paper and signed beneath foreign eyes. Many Germans did not experience the treaty as diplomacy. They experienced it as public humiliation. That was the wound Adolf Hitler walked into. And this is where the story becomes terrifying. Because Hitler did not first offer Germany hatred. He offered explanation. Under the weight of 1,000 broken promises, people were desperate for someone to tell them why their world had collapsed. Why fathers returned from war hollow-eyed. Why savings vanished overnight. Why proud soldiers now sold matches in the streets to survive. Complex truths require patience. Pain does not. Pain wants a face, a culprit, a betrayal. And Hitler understood. Something dark about human psychology. Suffering people will often choose a simple lie over a complicated reality if the lie gives their pain meaning. So he began to speak, not like a statesman, like a man translating rage into language. Beer halls filled with exhausted workers became theaters of emotional infection. Smoke drifted beneath low ceilings while angry crowds leaned closer with every sentence. Witnesses described Hitler studying audiences obsessively, watching their eyes, their breathing, their reactions, learning precisely which words tightened fists and which words ignited applause. Then came the accusation. Germany had not been defeated because it was weak, he claimed. Germany had been betrayed, and suddenly millions of desperate people felt something dangerous return to them. Not hope, purpose. Hitler did not heal Germany's wound. He pushed his fingers into it, deeper and deeper. Then he pointed toward the Jews. That was the moment the sickness truly began. Because once a nation believes its suffering was caused by hidden enemies, hatred no longer feels immoral. It feels necessary. Hatred alone was not enough. Hatred burns fast. Fear lasts longer. And Adolf Hitler understood that if he truly wanted to turn Germany against the Jews, he could not simply make Germans angry. He had to make them afraid. The records lie when they describe Nazi anti-Semitism as mere prejudice. This was something colder, more calculated. A psychological operation aimed directly at the terrified heart of a collapsing nation. Hitler began constructing the image of an invisible enemy, not an army crossing borders, not soldiers carrying rifles beneath foreign flags. Something far more disturbing. A neighbor. A silence that speaks volumes echoes through the newspapers of the 1920s and early 1930s. Headlines whispering about financial conspiracies, political corruption, cultural decay. Stories repeated so often that suspicion began to feel like instinct. Jews were accused of controlling banks, manipulating the press, poisoning German culture, even orchestrating both capitalism and communism at the same time. The contradiction did not matter. Fear rarely demands logic. It only demands repetition. Under the weight of economic despair, exhausted people began searching each other's faces for signs of betrayal. And that is the true horror of propaganda. It transforms uncertainty into paranoia. Suddenly, the enemy was no longer somewhere beyond the horizon. The enemy lived downstairs, worked beside you, taught your children, fought in the same war, spoke the same language. And yet Hitler insisted they were not truly German. That was the poison. Not simply that Jews were dangerous, but that they were secretly dangerous. There is a chilling pattern hidden beneath the dust of history. Societies become most unstable when fear loses a clear shape. Hitler gave fear a human face, not through evidence, but through emotional repetition, so relentless it began sinking into the subconscious of the nation like black water through cracked stone. Beer halls grew louder, crowds tighter, breathing heavier. Witnesses described listeners trembling with emotion as Hitler spoke of betrayal with near religious intensity. Some wept, some screamed, some stood frozen beneath the heat of collective rage, feeling something intoxicating spread through the room, certainty. And certainty can become deadly when built upon lies. Hitler made Germans fear Jews before he made them hate them, because fear changes human behavior in ways hatred alone cannot. Fear makes people suspicious. Fear isolates communities. Fear makes cruelty feel defensive instead of immoral. That is how neighbors slowly become threats inside the human imagination. The most terrifying part. Many of the people being accused had buried sons in German uniforms during the First World War. Jewish families had bled for Germany, prayed for Germany, loved Germany. But now the country they believed was home had begun looking at them with unfamiliar eyes, cold eyes, searching eyes, eyes already learning how to see enemies where neighbors once stood. A lie repeated once is dangerous. A lie repeated 1,000 times becomes atmosphere. And by the 1930s, Germany was breathing it. The records lie when they portray propaganda as mere posters and speeches. Nazi propaganda was not information, it was environmental control. A slow flooding of the human mind until suspicion became instinct and hatred began moving through society like poison through veins. You heard it in cafes, thick with cigarette smoke and bitterness. You heard it crackling through radios, glowing softly in dark apartments where exhausted families sat listening for hope. You saw it hanging from walls, printed in newspapers, whispered in classrooms, projected onto cinema screens beneath ceilings trembling with applause. The message never changed. The Jews are dangerous. The Jews are corrupting Germany. The Jews are the reason you suffer. Again, again, again. A silence that speaks volumes hides inside ordinary moments from those years. A mother reading headlines at the breakfast table while her child quietly absorbs every word. A teacher pointing at racial diagrams while students stare with the numb obedience of children too young to understand they are being taught how to hate. A shopkeeper lowering his voice when Jewish customers enter the room. This is how societies are reprogrammed. Not all at once. Gradually, until prejudice no longer feels extreme, only familiar. Under the weight of 1,000 repeated slogans, people stopped asking whether the accusations were true. That is, the psychological turning point propaganda seeks. Not belief, exhaustion. A lie heard long enough stops sounding like a lie. It begins sounding like common sense, and common sense can become monstrous. Joseph Goebbels understood this with terrifying precision. Propaganda was not designed to convince intellectuals, it was designed to bypass thought completely. To strike emotion before logic could breathe, fear before reflection, instinct before morality. The most chilling part is how ordinary it all became. Children traded antisemitic jokes in schoolyards. Neighbors repeated conspiracy theories over dinner. Films portrayed Jews as diseased parasites, while audiences sat silently beneath flickering light, absorbing hatred as entertainment. The sky itself seemed to darken over Germany, streets filled with marching banners, loudspeakers roaring through public squares, the nation slowly losing the ability to distinguish truth from repetition. And then came the most dangerous moment of all. Not the first hateful speech, not the first anti-Semitic law, but the day millions of people no longer found any of it strange. That is the true horror of propaganda. Its greatest victory is not when people believe the lie, it is when they stop noticing it exists. Because once hatred becomes normal, conscience begins to suffocate quietly inside the human soul, and by then, the transformation is already underway. The Nazis understood something terrifying about the human mind. If you want hatred to survive, teach it to children before they are old enough to question it. And so the classrooms became battlefields, not with bullets, with ideas. The records lie when they describe German schools of the 1930s as ordinary places of education. Under the shadow of the Nazi regime, education became psychological engineering. Textbooks no longer existed to teach children how to think. They existed to teach them who deserved to be feared. Under the weight of 1,000-year-old dust, we found a heartbeat inside the archives of Nazi classrooms. Arithmetic problems asking students to calculate the economic burden of Jewish families. Biology lessons reducing human beings into racial categories like specimens trapped beneath glass. Maps, charts, diagrams. Cold pseudoscience dressed in the language of truth. And children believed it. Because children trust adults before they trust themselves. A silence that speaks volumes lingers in photographs from the time. Young faces staring forward with mechanical obedience, small hands raised in salute before they fully understood the meaning of loyalty. Their childhood slowly dissolving into ideology while the sky outside seemed permanently grey with marching smoke and distant flags. Hitler did not simply want obedient citizens, he wanted emotional inheritance. A generation trained to associate compassion with weakness and obedience with virtue. The Hitler Youth expanded rapidly. Boys learned discipline, sacrifice, racial doctrine. Girls were taught purity, loyalty, duty to the nation. The regime wrapped propaganda inside belonging. Uniforms, songs, brotherhood, identity. That is how extremism seduces the young, not always through fear, sometimes through the desperate human need to belong. And somewhere inside this machinery, something fragile began dying. Empathy. A Jewish child could sit beside a German classmate for years, share jokes, share lunches, share childhood itself, and still slowly become transformed into the other through repetition, so constant it no longer sounded hateful. Only normal. That is the moment a society truly changes. Not when adults scream in the streets, but when children stop asking why the hatred exists at all. Because by then, prejudice has moved deeper than politics. It has entered instinct. The most chilling truth is this: many teachers were not sadists. Many parents were not monsters. Many children laughed and played like children everywhere. And yet the machine continued working, quietly, patiently, turning classrooms into factories of suspicion, turning innocence into obedience, turning an entire generation into witnesses being trained step by step, not merely to tolerate exclusion, but to accept it as natural. And once hatred becomes natural inside the mind of a child, history begins preparing for something far darker. The destruction of a people does not begin with camps. It begins with distance, with silence, with the slow, almost invisible process of teaching society who no longer belongs. The records lie when they describe the isolation of German Jews as sudden. It happened gradually, quietly, like winter entering a house through cracks, too small to notice until the cold is everywhere. At first it was business boycotts, signs outside Jewish shops, crowds encouraged not to enter, stormtroopers standing near storefronts while nervous customers lowered their eyes and kept walking. A silence that speaks volumes lives inside those moments. Old friends passing each other in the street without speaking. Familiar faces suddenly pretending not to recognize one another. The unbearable humiliation of watching loyalty evaporate from human eyes. Under the weight of 1,000-year-old dust, we found a heartbeat inside letters written by Jewish families during those years. The same sentence appears again and again in different forms. We no longer recognize our neighbors. That is how dehumanization truly works. Not through explosions, through emotional abandonment. Doctors lost licenses. Professors disappeared from universities. Lawyers were removed from courts. Children expelled from schools. Each new restriction presented as temporary, necessary, patriotic. And every time society adjusted to the cruelty, the regime pushed further. That is the terrifying pattern. Human beings can adapt to almost anything, including injustice. The Nuremberg Laws transformed suspicion into legal separation. Jews were stripped of citizenship. Marriage between Jews and non-Jews became forbidden. Suddenly, people who had fought for Germany, paid taxes to Germany, buried their dead beneath German soil, were now officially classified as outsiders inside their own homeland. The sky over Germany seemed permanently heavy then. Thick with banners, smoke, marching boots echoing through narrow streets, while fear settled into apartment walls like dampness. And still, many people remained silent. That silence matters, because the tragedy did not begin the night glass shattered during Kristallnacht. It began years earlier when ordinary Germans learned to watch exclusion happen without intervening. A Jewish shopkeeper sweeping broken dignity from the floor, while pedestrians stared and kept moving. A child asking why classmates no longer sit beside him. A war veteran opening old military medals with trembling hands, staring at proof that he once belonged to a country already forgetting him. The goal was never merely discrimination, it was emotional separation. Hitler needed Germans to stop thinking of Jews as part of us. Because once a society accepts that certain people no longer belong inside the moral circle of humanity, cruelty stops feeling cruel. It starts feeling justified. And that is the moment civilizations begin descending into darkness without realizing how far they have already fallen. Hatred becomes far more dangerous when it learns how to wear a uniform, a courtroom, an official seal, a signature beneath cold paper. The records lie when they describe Nazi laws as merely political measures. These laws were psychological weapons. Their purpose was not only to punish Jews, their purpose was to teach ordinary Germans that exclusion was now morally acceptable because the state itself had approved it. And once cruelty receives legal language, many people stop recognizing it as cruelty. The Nuremberg Laws arrived in 1935, like a slow tightening around the throat of an entire community. Under the glow of banners and orchestrated applause, the regime announced that Jews were no longer full citizens of Germany. Marriage between Jews and non-Jews became forbidden. Relationships became crimes. Identity itself became evidence. A silence that speaks volumes lingers inside government offices from those years. Clerks stamping documents, bureaucrats adjusting glasses beneath dim lamps, ink drying on papers that quietly dismantled human lives line by line. No screaming, no gunfire, only paperwork. That is what makes this chapter of history feel so cold. Under the weight of 1,000-year-old dust, we found a heartbeat hidden inside personal testimonies from German Jews. Again and again, the same emotional fracture appears: confusion. Many could not comprehend how quickly legality had transformed against them. One day they belonged to Germany. The next day, Germany's laws informed them they were strangers. Imagine the suffocating terror of opening a letter and discovering your marriage is now considered illegal by the country where you were born. Imagine standing in a government office while officials discuss your humanity with administrative detachment. That is how authoritarian systems destroy people, not always with immediate violence, but with gradual bureaucratic suffocation. And ordinary citizens adapted with frightening speed. Shopkeepers refused service because regulations demanded it. Teachers enforced separation because policy required it. Employers dismissed Jewish workers while telling themselves they were simply obeying the law. That is the terrifying psychological shift. When injustice becomes institutionalized, conscience begins surrendering responsibility to authority. People stop asking, is this right? They begin asking, is this permitted? And that distinction can destroy civilizations. The sky over Germany darkened further as legal discretion. When hatred is stamped by the state, many people no longer call it evil. They call it order. They call it law. And once a society accepts that legality equals morality, almost anything becomes possible. Even horrors still waiting in the shadows. Because the laws did not end the persecution. They prepared the machinery for what came next. By the late 1930s, Germany had become a country where silence could feel safer than conscience, and that may be one of the most frightening transformations of all. The records lie when they suggest terror only existed inside prisons or concentration camps. Fear had entered ordinary life. It lived inside apartment walls, inside train stations. Inside, whispered conversations cut short the moment footsteps approached the door. People learned to lower their voices, to avoid eye contact, to pretend not to notice. A silence that speaks volumes settled over Germany like ash after a fire. The Gestapo did not need to watch everyone. That is the terrifying genius of fear. People begin policing themselves long before the state arrives. A neighbor disappears after criticizing the regime. A teacher loses his position after defending a Jewish colleague. A journalist stops asking questions. Soon, entire communities learn the psychological rhythm of survival. Stay quiet, stay useful, stay invisible. And so the machine continued forward with remarkably little resistance. Not because every German became a fanatic, but because enough became afraid. Under the weight of 1,000-year-old dust, we found a heartbeat inside diaries from the era. Again and again, ordinary citizens described the same internal conflict. They knew something was wrong, yet convinced themselves remaining silent was necessary for their families, careers, survival. That is the moral collapse authoritarianism depends upon. Not universal hatred, universal caution, and several from people benefited. That is another truth hidden beneath the ruins of history. Jewish businesses were confiscated, homes emptied, positions opened, opportunities appeared. Human beings who once struggled economically suddenly found apartments, promotions, possessions becoming available through the suffering of others. Evil becomes easier to tolerate when it quietly rewards obedience. The sky over Germany felt heavier then, crowded with banners and suspicion. Streets echoing with marching boots, while behind closed curtains people rehearsed dangerous sentences inside their minds, but rarely spoke them aloud. This is wrong. What if they come for us next? How far will this go? But fear suffocates courage gradually, one compromise at a time, one silence at a time, one moment of looking away at a time. Hitler did not build a nation entirely made of believers. He built a nation where too many people became terrified of saying no. And once enough people fear the consequences of compassion more than the consequences of cruelty, society enters extremely dangerous territory. Because atrocities do not require millions of enthusiastic killers. They require millions of human beings deciding the danger belongs to someone else. That may be the coldest truth hidden inside this chapter of history. Many people told themselves, "This has nothing to do with me," until eventually it had everything to do with everyone. The Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers. It began with emotional preparation, with repetition, with fear carefully fed into exhausted minds until hatred stopped feeling hateful at all. That is the final piece of the puzzle, the most terrifying one. The records lie when they suggest societies collapse into cruelty overnight. History almost never moves that way. It happens slowly enough for ordinary people to adjust their morality one compromise at a time. First came the words, then suspicion, then isolation, then laws, then shattered glass beneath boots on frozen streets, then deportations, then silence. And by the time the unthinkable finally arrived, millions had already been psychologically prepared to accept it. A silence that speaks volumes hangs over Europe in those years. train stations humming beneath grey skies while families vanished into rail cars. Curtains closing quietly in nearby homes. Citizens standing still with their hands buried inside coat pockets, watching history pass directly in front of them while convincing themselves they were powerless to stop it. That is how human beings survive moral collapse, not by refusing to see evil, but by learning how to live beside it. Under the weight of 1,000-year-old dust, we found a heartbeat hidden inside the machinery of Nazi hatred. The regime did not merely persuade Germans to hate Jews. It persuaded them that hatred was responsibility, patriotism, duty, protection. The most dangerous moment in any society is not when cruelty appears. It is when cruelty begins disguising itself as virtue. And that is why this story still breathes today. Because the shadows did not die with Hitler. Shadows rarely die. They wait. Waiting for economic fear, waiting for national humiliation, waiting for desperate people searching for someone to blame. Was it worth the cost? Germany lost its soul long before it lost the war. A civilization that once produced philosophers, musicians, scientists, poets, slowly taught itself how to look away from human suffering without trembling. That may be the deepest wound history leaves behind. Not what monsters did, but what ordinary people learned to accept. And now the question no longer belongs to the past. It belongs to us. Are we truly different today? Would we recognize propaganda before it becomes atmosphere? Would we speak when silence feels safer? Would we defend people already pushed outside the moral circle of us? Or would we too adapt slowly enough to stop noticing the darkness arriving? Because that is the final warning hidden beneath the ruins of Nazi Germany. The road to unimaginable horror was built by human beings who convinced themselves they were doing something necessary, and history whispers one unbearable truth into the present. The shadows don't just fade, they wait. Hitler turned Germany against the Jews without beginning with bullets. He began with a story: fear, humiliation, propaganda, law, and the silence of those who told themselves it was not their problem. That is why this history still burns. Because before cruelty becomes violence, it often learns to call itself order, security, duty, love of country. If this truth weighs on your heart, leave a sign in the comments. Tell us, which step was the most dangerous? And if you believe history must be faced, not buried, subscribe and walk with us, because next time we enter the darkest weapon of the Nazi regime, not the gun, the lie,